welcome back to Combat Mission for another micro unit guide. This time we're going to take a look at the FV-432 Mark III Bulldog as used by the British forces in Combat Mission Shock Force. The Bulldog is an armoured personnel carrier, literally a box on tracks, and is the latest mark of the venerable FV-432. These are variants in the FV-430 series, which entered production in 1962. 3,000 were built before production ceased in 1971. The APC variant fitted into British Army doctrine as a battle taxi, intended to deliver the infantry to the battlefield where they would then fight dismounted. But the FV-430 design was simple and robust enough to be developed into a multitude of variants, from mortar carriers and ATGM vehicles to mobile command posts and recovery vehicles. The FV-432 was supposed to be replaced in service in the late 1980s by the FV-510 Warrior, which could not only keep up better with the British Army's new Challenger-made battle tanks, but carried its own 30mm cannon. However, a combination of cost-saving measures and the end of the Cold War cut the numbers of Warrior ordered, and ultimately, even though the British Army likewise reduced in size, the FV-432 soldiered on in the background. In 2006, the British Army was conducting counterinsurgency operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and urgently needed more armoured vehicles to protect troops against RPGs, EFP mines and IEDs. With hundreds of FV-432s still in service, a program to bring them up to the new Mark III standard was initiated, notably upgrading the engine, which improved speed and performance even after masses of theatre entry standard equipment in the form of explosive reactive armour, electronic warfare systems and remote control weapon systems had been added. A total of 500 FV-432s were converted and delivered to the Army in 2006, where they became known as Bulldogs. That's a very quick overview of the vehicle. For our digital walkaround, we're going to use the up-armoured version with the remote control weapon system, which is referred to in CMSF2 as the Bulldog Enforcer. Starting at the bow, we have a lot of add-on armour in an interesting configuration. On the port side, we have some slat or bar armour. Starboard, we have something a bit chunkier. I always thought that this was explosive reactive armour, but a bit of testing reveals that it's not, it's just passive applique armour. So why might we have a mix of different armour types? I don't know. Answers in the comments if you do, but we can speculate. If we think about what's behind the slat armour, we've got two big grills on the roof, so that's obviously where the engine is. If we look behind the applique armour, we've got a hatch with a periscope, then a cupola. That's where the driver sits, with the commander's position behind him. The applique armour is a lot more effective than the slat armour, so we're probably looking at a decision to prioritise protection of the crew. And this makes sense in the context of the Bulldog's use in Iraq and Afghanistan, where British casualties were politically sensitive. The engine, meanwhile, is pretty chunky on its own and able to absorb damage without passing it on to the crew or passengers, but there's also a bit of a void in between it and the inside of the front slope, which could function as a kind of spaced armour against shaped charge warheads. In other words, that side of the bow was presumably considered acceptably protected by slat armour, or at least acceptably protected in terms of crew preservation versus the cost and weight of covering the entire front with applique armour. Moving on from the frontal armour, on each side of the bow we have a set of smoke launchers, and above them we have a box containing an IED jammer. Along with a set of antennae further back on the top of the Bulldog, these serve to degrade and hopefully block radio and cell phone signals used to detonate IEDs. Moving around to the sides, the flanks of the Bulldog are covered with explosive reactive armour, or ERA. ERA blocks or panels explode outwards when hit, and the shockwave from the explosion breaks the coherency of the molten metal jets used by shaped charge weapons, significantly reducing their ability to penetrate armour. These are really effective against single-stage heat warheads, like most of those on the RPG rockets used by Syrian and unconventional anti-tank teams. What's interesting about this is that the frontal applique and slat armour offers significantly less protection than the ERA. So the Bulldog is actually better protected on its flanks than it is to its front, which is quite unusual for armoured vehicles. As for why there's era on the sides and not the front, again I don't know, but I suspect there are two simple explanations. First, that there is a large hatch on the front slope for access to the transmission and engine that would be obstructed by ERA blocks or panels. Second, frontal protection may not have been as high a priority as flank protection given the counterinsurgency context the add-on armour package was installed in. If we think about setting up RPG ambushes or laying off-route EFP mines, these do seem more likely to be targeting the sides of vehicles than their fronts. Notably, the RAP-2 Warrior the Bulldog was introduced to supplement also only has ERA on its sides. Coming round to the back of the Bulldog, this is protected by more slat armour. The add-on armour here has to take into account the door into the rear compartment, so it needs to be lightweight and non-obstructive enough to actually open, as well as not obstructing other little bits and bobs like the brake lights. The rear door has an armoured vision block in it, so the passengers aren't totally disoriented when they dismount, and there's a cutout in the slats so that people can actually use the handle from the outside. Moving on to the top of the vehicle, starting at the rear, we have a magic box, which may contain generic stowage, more EW gubbins, or sandwiches, I don't know. Forward of that we have the aforementioned cluster of electronic warfare antennas used for jamming IEDs, then a circular top hatch. This doesn't open in combat mission, but obviously it does in reality. Finally, between the top hatch and the commander's cupola we have a remote controlled weapon system mounting a 50 caliber M2 machine gun. This is a really common NATO weapon, so I won't dwell too much on it. Suffice to say, it will penetrate the side armour of BMPs at 500 meters and the side armour of BTRs at 1000. Notably though, the mount does not have a thermal imager, so it can't see and engage through smoke. Overall, the Bulldog carries 1000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. This comes in 100 round boxes, which are reloaded by the commander, who has to open his hatch and stick his head up to do so manually. The other version of the Bulldog in Shock Force has a pintle mounted GPMG, which is operated by the commander behind an armoured glass screen. Circling back to the engine and the Bulldog's mobility, on the vehicle course it scored 513 points. That's in line with tracked IFVs like the Bradley at 498 and the BMP-2 at 499. It did bog 6 times on the rough ground section, but that could very easily be an outlier. Finally, we need to look at the Bulldog in terms of its role. It's an armoured personnel carrier, there's space in the back for 10 dismounts and a pile of extra weapons, ammunition and equipment. Namely 6 one-shot disposable rocket launchers in the form of 3 L2A1 interim light anti-armour weapons, which is the British designation for the AT-4, and 3 L1A1 light anti-structure missiles, which is essentially the old M72 lore with a beefier warhead. Along with these, the Bulldog carries 60 40mm high explosive grenades and over 2,000 rounds of 5.56mm small arms ammunition. 10 dismounts is a good number of dismounts, and it is something that sets the Bulldog apart from the Warrior, which only has space for 7, and IFVs in general, which tend to have less space for passengers. In Shock Force's British Army terms, infantry sections come in at 7 or 8 soldiers, so there's enough room in the back of the Bulldog to add in a specialist team as a kind of bonus, particularly GPMG, Javelin or Sniper teams. As for the Bulldog itself, it does a good job of getting its dismounts about. It's reasonably mobile, it's well protected against the threats it's intended to go up against, namely what is basically light infantry, and it brings a bit of firepower to the table. There's not really much else to say here, it's a simple but effective bit of kit. Not bad for a metal box from the 60s. Hope you all enjoyed this video and found it useful and interesting. If you'd like to see these early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.